Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, I will comment on an interesting game that was played recently by two of the top women players in the world. It will touch on two very important subjects. One is a pin, and the other one is to attack the enemy king. You may wonder, when is it time to start the attack against the opponent's king? Well, there is no clear black and white answer to that. However, as a rule of thumb, I can certainly tell you two things. It is rarely in the very early stages of the game, prior to you yourself developing your own pieces and putting your own king to safety. The other sign can be that it is indeed start of the time for the attack is if the opponent's king is all alone. In other words, for example, as we shall see in the upcoming game, if a king has castled to the king's side, and yet all or most of its pieces of the same color are far away on the other side of the board. Well, let's get started with our game, where white played d4, very common opening move, and black responded knight f6. In the first initial moves, both sides are fighting for key middle squares on the board, as well as developing their pieces or opening files and diagonals for their pieces. This is a very common way to start the game so far, knight f3, and black played d5. After these first initial moves, when the game could have been proceeded in a Queen's Indian defense, if black would have played b6 in this position, but black chose to rather transpose to the Queen's Gambit declined. In this position, white has several ways to play, but the most common one is to continue developing and ignore black's threat on the pawn on c4. If black indeed would capture that pawn, white most often would play e4 simply, opening the diagonal of the bishop with the idea to then on the following move to capture that pawn back. It wouldn't be unusual to play e3 either. Of course, if white would be in a terrible rush, could give a check as well and grab the pawn then on the next move, although I have to say that's considered the least among those three options. You may wonder why. The answer to that is that the queen generally shouldn't be brought into the game at such an early stage. So the game itself continued instead of pawn takes pawn, with black developing the bishop to b4. This creates an immediate pin on white's knight, although that's not a major problem as the knight is protected. And of course, as we know, the bishop and the knight are of equal value, so therefore the bishop move did not create a very scary threat. Now you may wonder what happens if now white gives a check and attacks the bishop at the same time. Will black lose his bishop? Well, before you listen further, try to answer that question on your own first. Well, black will not lose his own bishop because black will have the opportunity to simply block this check with a knight and protect the bishop at the same go. Therefore, the queen check doesn't make much sense. So let's go back and see how the game continued. After the bishop pin, white simply played e3, on one hand protecting the pawn on c4 by opening the diagonal for the bishop. At the same time, this move closes in the other bishop. So therefore, it is considered more ambitious to play bishop to g5. This has been played, of course, in many games, and usually black either attacks the bishop immediately with h6 or captures the pawn on c4, which actually leads to a very complicated and interesting game. But let's proceed with our game, where white played e3 and black simply castled. Actually, now we have kind of transposed to the famous Nimzo-Indian defense that has been very popular for almost a century now. White continued developing the bishop to d3, getting ready to castle, and black immediately fought for the center by playing c5. As you can see in this game, both sides are making natural moves, and one thing that I'd like you to remember for sure, how both sides are focusing on the middle of the board. You do not see moves such as moving the knight to the edge of the board, or you do not see moves like rook b1 or moving with the king out for no reason. So white plays very naturally, and so does black. So these are the type of moves that we call common sense moves, natural moves, and the ones I just was kind of pointing out, they are usually not good ideas. So white proceeded by castling, which is generally a very good idea, almost I would say a must. You should try to castle within the first 8 to 10 moves of the game. Generally, the only exception from that would be if you either can capture your opponent's pieces and gain material advantage, or in some cases to temporarily delay castling to make sure you don't lose any of your pieces once they are being attacked. But now everything continues normal for now. Black played knight c6, again a natural move which controls two center squares from c6. And now white played a3. a3 is a normal move in this position. It obviously attacks the black bishop. It asks it which way to go, to trade or to retreat. Generally, in this position, black indeed trades. Well, you may wonder, how come black is trading a bishop for a knight? Well, the situation on that is that generally we don't recommend to do that. However, here black accomplishes immediately a very concrete achievement, in that now white has doubled pawns on the c file. Black continued now with queen to c7, freeing up the d8 square for the rook. Now you may wonder, how come white doesn't take the pawn on c5, but as you can see, that will result in creating 3 pawns on the same file, which would be called tripled pawns. And of course, black wouldn't have to worry much in gaining that pawn back, as at some point when the knight would move away to a5, we'll open up the queen's attack on the pawn, and black certainly wouldn't need to worry not getting back the pawn. For example, trade, black could immediately play knight a5, attacking the bishop as well as the pawn simultaneously. So white usually in this position wouldn't capture on c5, but plays bishop b2, which in a way completes development, at least of all the minor pieces, and white has castled already as well. So all of this has been played many times, and now if black is not careful, white will get a better position because they do have the pair of bishops. So therefore black here usually acts the following way: trades and immediately plays e5. So now let's see what's going on in this position. One of the main purposes an accomplishment of black's last move is that it opens up the black's bishop's diagonal, and that bishop is planning to get out to some active place like to g4. One challenge that white has in this opening, despite having the pair of bishops, is that the bishop on b2, at least temporarily, even though it has already moved and it's on the long diagonal, it is being a little buried behind the pawn in front of it on c3, and in fact at the moment even the pawn on d4. If white right now would capture the pawn on e5, black would recapture, and for example if knight captures, queen captures, and white would still be stuck a little bit with his bishop on b2 because of the pawn on c3. Because imagine, even if that bishop from c4 would move away, the pawn still wouldn't be ready to advance because the bishop on b2 is on an unprotected square. In the meantime, black also would get immediate threats of attack by playing knight to g4, threatening checkmate on h2. So as practice has shown so far, black has a pretty good position here. So let's go back to the position after e5 and look at other options. White could push the pawn up also, but here again black would be doing just fine. The knight could go to a5, immediately gaining time, attacking the bishop, and black would have nothing to worry. White continued with h3, which is a popular move in this position, with the idea to prevent the pin of the black bishop from g4. Well, since the g4 square is not available, black chose to develop the bishop to f5. And this completes the development of the minor pieces on the black side as well. Also, now that the bishop has developed, black's rook on the queen side is ready to enter the game. White played queen e2, connecting his own rooks, so the white rooks now are also ready to move to c1, d1, e1, and that's, by the way, oftentimes a big dilemma. Which of these three squares should the two rooks occupy? In this position, in most games, black continues by getting their rook, one rook to d8 and one rook to e8. However, in this very game, black chose a different move, moved his bishop back to g6 to a protected square. And now white played bishop b5 with a clear threat to trade bishop for knight and then grab a free pawn on e5. But of course, black noticed this. Remember, anytime your opponent makes a move, try to think, what does your opponent want to do? And if there is a threat, well, make sure defend against it, or make sure that your attack comes first if you choose not to defend. So black now continued by advancing the pawn, on one hand moving it away from the danger that it was in, and on the other hand immediately attacking white's knight. So now white either has to move the knight or move, capture, bishop takes knight. What happens now is, with this intermediate move, either black recaptures on c6 and then the knight can move, which happened in the game, or if black would try to win a piece by capturing white's knight first, in hopes that now either the white queen or pawn would capture the f3 pawn, they would be miscalculating, because the very same bishop that is under attack on c6 can also capture back on f3, and with that winning a pawn, because the bishop will no longer be sitting in danger on c6, but absolutely safely on f3. So therefore, in this position, capturing the knight would be a major mistake, and black is better off recapturing on c6. Generally, the first idea should be, in this position, to capture back with the queen. However, then white would gain important time by playing knight e5, and moreover, after the black queen moves away from the attack, white would be ready to play c4, and all of a sudden the white bishop on b2, which has been a passive piece so far in the game, would get activated, as the d pawn will have the opportunity to advance, and actually I would prefer white's position in that case. Black chose a somewhat surprising option here, but clearly the better one than capturing with the queen. Black took back with the pawn. Now, why am I saying that that's the less natural move? Well, the reason is that now black voluntarily doubled up his pawns on the c file. However, as I pointed out earlier, the reason for doing so was to make sure that white doesn't gain time, doesn't gain tempos with the knight e5 move attacking the black queen. At the same time also, black has opened the b file, and as we shall see, that will play an important role. Remember, now the white knight is still hanging and it needs to move. And white moved it to e5. The knight looks very nice on e5, and also in some cases the knight would be ready to capture, to trade for black's bishop. Therefore, black used the momentum that the bishop can run away, and with a tempo attacking white's queen. Of course, moving the pawn to block the attack would be not very good looking, as it would clearly weaken the defense in front of white's king. So therefore, white continued with queen c4 in hopes that now, since the pawn is hanging on c5, black would trade, and then black would be stuck with a weakness on c6, and white indeed would have an excellent position. But black can do better, and they did. Black played rook a to b8, immediately putting pressure on the white bishop on b2. White have protected the bishop with the rook, and now came knight to d7. This move temporarily protects the pawn on c5, and at the same time offers the exchange between the knights. White doesn't have many good alternatives, so therefore traded knights and queen took back. And this was the key moment in the game where white made a major mistake. White made a very natural move by simply accepting the gift by capturing the pawn on c5. Moreover, this move attacks black's bishop on h5 at the same time. So the question is, what's wrong with this move? Well, now we'll see the two themes that I was mentioning early in the game. Remember, one was the pin, and the other one that when is it time to go for an attack. And here black can gain the momentum to develop both things, to get a pin as well as the attack going. And as you shall see, the white queen will get completely cut out of the defense to the white king. So I suggest take a few minutes and try to see what you would do if you were playing with the black pieces here. Black continued with rook b5. This move, of course, attacks the queen, and if you look around, you'll notice that white has only one option where to go with the queen. So therefore, queen c4 is pretty much forced, and black immediately again using the momentum, was ready to double up the rooks. Now we can see the pain that white is in. The bishop is attacked a second time, and the only piece that can protect it is white's queen. And if you look carefully, you'll see the place from where it can protect it is not very attractive at all. The bishop is in a pin, as if the white bishop would move, then black would simply gain a rook. So white was forced to retreat the queen to a2 in order to avoid losing material. However, whenever you see a queen on a square like a2, 99% of the time it's not a good sign. White here is purely on the defensive, and if black plays correctly, black pretty much is winning. Of course, if white would get the time to recover and, for example, retreat the bishop and then trade the rooks, white would be a pawn up and white would be better. However, white will never get to do that in this game. And now the attack starts. We can see how most of the white pieces are not participating in the attack here. We can see how the white pieces are not participating in the defense of white's king. So therefore, black is ready for the storm. Bishop f3, very powerful move, and the black rook is also ready to get into the attack with rook g5 at the right moment. If white would capture right now, black would be ready to just take the pawn on h3 with an immediate checkmate threat of rook g5, and if white plays f4 trying to guard that square, black would checkmate with check, followed by rook swing over to h5, checkmate. After bishop f3, white continued with king h2, hoping to get maybe the rook into the defense, but it's just too slow, because black plays ambitiously and aggressively, sacrificing the bishop, forcing now white to capture it, because otherwise the black queen would come into h3 and then checkmate. So the king took the bishop, and the rook comes along on the 5th rank with rook g5 check. Now the only move to avoid the immediate checkmate is to move to h2. And now black is winning, although because of due to shortage of time, black first repeated moves with check and went back, king h2, and now played rook h5. Now we can see the trouble that white is in. The black queen is about to capture on h3, followed by a checkmate on the next move. White played rook h1, but this didn't help the situation either. Queen h3 still arrived, and now black can choose between two different checkmates in one, whether to just capture the rook in the corner, or, as black did, play rook g5. A well-played game by black, who was Tatania Kozintseva against her Ukrainian opponent Zhukova, where basically what white suffered for is the lack of defense near her king. So, the moral of the story is, if you see that most of your opponent pieces are far away from defending their king, it's usually a signal that it's time to start the attack. Thank you for listening. Be back next week for some more ideas. Bye-bye.